And now for our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Spalding. Dr. Spalding is a retired US Air Force Brigadier General and B-2 pilot. He is the former Senior Director of Strategy at the National Security Council and author of Stealth War, which is described as a searing expose of how the Chinese Communist Party continues to conduct its war for influence around the world. So, Dr. Spalding, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. And it's great. It's an honor to be here to speak with this group. I think what I would talk about today is the recent decision by the UK to ban Huawei's building out of its 5G network. And I want to talk about the problem more comprehensively than has previously been discussed in these forums. I think, first of all, we have to go back to some of your Rosemary's comments on the Chinese Communist Party, because we have to deal with the party as it is, not as we wish it to be. And the party itself has been influenced quite a bit by Mao's thinking with regard to warfare. In fact, if you think about Mao's version of war, he called it people's warfare. And it was really about undermining the political structure of the ruling Nationalist Party during the Civil War. And he used that through ideological and psychological and political warfare that was conducted throughout China, and eventually led to the overthrow of the Nationalist Party and the rise of the Communist Party into power in China. Now, this is very much a boots on the ground type of warfare. In fact, you have to be embedded in the communities, and it happens over a period of time. It's not an instantaneous attack or a strike or a military offensive like we would consider here in the West. In fact, if you differentiate the two between kind of this Western concept of warfare and the Eastern concept of warfare, you can very clearly distinguish it by two phrases. One by Clausewitz, and that is war is politics by other means, and Mao, where you would say politics is war by other means. In other words, political warfare becomes the leading effort in campaign in terms of perpetuating Chinese Communist Party rule in China and influence abroad. Now, the interesting thing that is different today, and why 5G has become so important, and why in particularly in the national security strategy, we say two things. One is data is a strategic resource. It is a strategic resource of the 21st century, much like oil was a strategic resource of the 20th century. And the other is that America needs to build a nationwide secure 5G network. That is on page 19 of the National Security Strategy. What was the intent behind that statement? The intent was a realization that over the course of, since the introduction of the iPhone and the Android phone, the iPhone was introduced in 2007, we've had a complete transformation in the global economy from an industrialized economy to an information economy. And that occurred in the United States and led to the transformation of some of the leading companies in the United States and, in fact, the globe. In 2007, AT&T, General Electric, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Microsoft were the top companies in the United States. Over the course of the next 10 years, it became Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Really a transformation in the global economy. And today, those companies represent something like 25% of the Standard & Poor Index, a huge value. Now, that's led to three primary challenges for democracies. And it's not just the United States that has this challenge. It's the UK. It's any democracy in today's global information economy. The first is a business problem. And the business problem is that AT&T and Verizon in the United States and other telco operators like British Telecom in the UK were faced with the fact that these companies, Facebook, Amazon and Google, Netflix and the like, came over the top of the telecommunications networks that required hundreds of billions of dollars of investment and allowed the tech companies in Silicon Valley to monetize user data. Now, what did they use that data for? Primarily, they used it for influence. In other words, the data was used to convince you to buy more shoes or more products or click on more ads. It was taking the data that was available and using it with big data analysis, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other technologies to take what had heretofore been, difficult to deal with petabytes of data and formed it into a usable construct that these companies could make enormous revenues on top of. So the business model, because the telecom industry was cut out of that value proposition, they tended to be to really reduce their amount of investment in the telecom equipment manufacturer. And in fact, this coincided with the rise of Huawei, who was offering networking equipment at bargain basement prices. So the business problem led to a destruction of any U.S. Equipment provider. And now today around the world, we have Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, Huawei, and ZTE as the 5 major network equipment providers. There's a lot of smaller ones, but those companies pretty much dominate the industry. Yet what happens today, because of the lack of value in telecom investment, Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung, when faced with competition by Huawei and ZTE, just aren't competitive. And they're not competitive because Huawei and ZTE get subsidization from China. The other problem is the tech companies themselves. So the tech companies themselves, seeing the power of data and the way that the Chinese are using it, have decided to ally themselves with the Chinese Communist Party. That's why you see major companies like Facebook, Amazon, and Google with artificial intelligence research centers in China. So at the same time that the United States was dominating the global information economy, China and the Chinese Communist Party was looking to dominate it in the next version of it, and that is 5G. And so Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent are the dominant players within the China market, and they have been introducing in the last few years 5G technology. In fact, in 2017, you could go into a restaurant in China, order some food off your phone, walk into the restaurant and never have to touch your phone again because a camera would pick up your face, do facial recognition, and the server would greet you by name and hand you your food. What I just described to you is really what 5G is about. It's not about the smartphone world that Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon built. It's really about the smart city. And that's what China seeks to dominate. So in the tech world, what we see is the goal of the Chinese Communist Party is 2 things. One is, as Kai-Fu Lee, China's leading artificial intelligence researcher, says, it is to become the Saudi Arabia of data. Why do they want to become the Saudi Arabia of data? Because what they found, the technologies that Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent had mastered to great economic effect could also be used to influence populations. So the goal in China is to build out the sensor network, if you will, in smart cities to be able to monitor what everybody does at all times, and to use that monitoring along with the tools and technologies and business models that Silicon Valley developed to really understand the population and begin to influence it in ways that is defined by the Chinese Communist Party with regard to what is a good citizen. If you're doing things the party likes, you'll be rewarded. If you're doing things the party doesn't like, you'll be disincentivized. And that is built automatically into the e-commerce platform that China is building within China. So why is it so important to the West that we understand this? Well, because China does not see this as confined to the areas behind the Great Firewall. In fact, they seek to expand it, because if they can expand it, this sensor network that is tied to the powerful tech companies that will be coming of the future. So as Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google became to dominate the S&P 500 in 10 years, what the Chinese Communist Party seeks is for Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent to do the same. So Tencent, for instance, invested in Ret'd, ByteDance, which is another Chinese tech company, it owns TikTok. So many of these companies are beginning to move in outside the Great Firewall to establish their market presence in media and e-commerce and social media platforms. And this allows them, with the combination of the ability to collect the information off of 5G, to begin to influence outside their borders. What does this look like? Well, we can look at the recent coronavirus outbreak and pandemic that was spread by the Chinese Communist Party's deliberate actions, and realize that 40% of the social media posts surrounding the coronavirus have been done by bots. Now, there's also other, influencers. In fact, we call them the 50 Cent Army that are a part of this. So the idea is that, these networks that allow them to collect data then allows them to build an understanding of the characteristics of individuals in free societies, then become fair game for the influence campaigns on social media networks. But it doesn't end there, because as these companies gain in economic power, then their ability to influence other companies and other institutions becomes really part of the fabric of our global economy. So, for instance, the National Basketball Association, when it was recently, when a general manager from one of the teams in the United States tweeted about the people of Hong Kong, he was threatened to be fired. In fact, all the merchandise was taken off the shelves in all the digital marketplaces in China almost instantaneously. So this ability to influence through economic means, this e-commerce and globalized construct that the West built, is what we're talking about with regard to Chinese influence and their ability to motivate populations of democratic societies to self-censor, to really abandon the principles of their founding societies. Now, the real problem at the heart of this is a technological problem, and that is the data model. The data model has not changed substantially since the invention of the internet with ARPANET. It is an open data model, which means that once you have access to a system, you can take all the data you want. This is what the current 5G technology is built on. It's built on an open data model. And so it is a continuation of the challenge that we have today that's technological. It's also business. And then finally, it's about the policy problem. And the policy problem is that we haven't come to grips, and from a national security perspective, of the danger of this e-commerce platform, of this global information economy, that authoritarians can conduct direct influence of democratic populations and begin to change the nature of their societies. Now, as a military member, I trained for my entire career to wage war from the sky. In fact, militaries in the West have been built to protect the land, the sea, the space, and the air of democratic societies from coercion by outside threats. What our current national security strategy recognizes is that the ability to do that is not sufficient in a digital 21st century. And in fact, we need to be much more focused on protecting the digital space, and in particular, protecting individuals' data within a free society. Things like global data protection regulation, GDPR, are not sufficient. Many of these companies will take the fine and continue to do the things that they're doing. And the governments really don't have an ability, because they've essentially abdicated their ability to police the digital space, because it's primarily been built out by private companies. So it really requires that governments in free societies take a much more proactive role in protecting the citizenry in the digital realm. And that's what I think the issue from the perspective of Huawei today, why the decision from the UK was so important, but yet why it is still insufficient, and why we still have challenges in democracies today in protecting and preserving democratic institutions. And here in the United States, preserving our republic, and for the UK, preserving its democracy. This extends into international institutions, as we know that international institutions like the United Nations and World Health Organization and World Trade Organization, the World Bank, all face pressure. And quite frankly, this is a national security strategy's main finding, is that democracy's ability to promote the founding principles of democracy, free trade, human rights, civil liberties, rule of law is no longer present in the international order. In fact, needs to be, brought to the fore. And it needs to be brought to the fore by democracies working together to promote those interests. This is, in fact, what Secretary Pompeo's there in the UK to talk about. This has been really discussed since the first quarter of 2018, and I think will be, if successful, will lead to more of a promotion of democratic principles from here on out. So, I thank you for the time to speak, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Spalding.